InfoPlus for genuine information.
Dr. Kennedy, welcome to InfoPlus.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for taking the time out to be a part of our show.
I'm really glad to.
I heard that this is your first visit to Nepal, and welcome to Nepal and hope you've had a good stay. I've been having a fabulous time. I'm here with a delegation of some 8 people from the Australian government to talk about Australian education and Australian trade more broadly. I want to ask you, what was your perception of Nepal like before the visit, and what kind of similarities or differences did you find in that perception of yours about Nepal?
I think like most people, when we think about Nepal, if we've never visited, or we think about beautiful mountain trails and peaceful, holy places. And it is that. It is that, very much that. But it's also a really sophisticated, thriving community. Kathmandu's very exciting and has great restaurants and cafes. And I don't think I was expecting that.
So you talked a bit on the delegation that you're here with to highlight your purpose on the visit to Nepal.
Well, it's the first visit that the Australian government's been able to make to Nepal since COVID.
Right.
And so I'm from the Australian Trade and Investment Commissioner. I came with one of my colleagues. Also, I came with the Department of Education, Science and Employment, and they brought 2 people along. Also, the Department of Home Affairs. So there's a group of us who've come to meet with people in Nepal, but learn more about the relationship between our 2 countries, but also really to profile education opportunities and to learn more about what we could be doing to strengthen the Nepal-Australia relationship in education.
During the COVID time as well, Australia had a really important role in helping international students, which included Nepali international students in Australia as well.
Right.
To highlight certain aspects of that as well.
Yeah, thank you. And Nepal is a really important group of students for us. So they bring an incredible vibrancy and an excitement to Australia. And when our borders closed, it was a really difficult time for international students and Nepali students as well. So Australian institutions worked really hard to wrap themselves around international students and to support them. But so did the Australian government, and we made a number of both financial and non-financial support mechanisms available to international students. But in Australia, where I work, we also look to find better resourcing, better support for international students online. And we built out the Study Australia website to provide resources for students to get in contact with their institutions, to get in contact with each other through things like Study Australia India Experience Program, which is a great program for getting groups of students together, both international and domestic students, and put them together in virtual teams to work on real-life projects for organisations around the world. So we have a number of these kinds of strategies to keep people connected. So in addition to the really important welfare support, we provided opportunities for students to stay in touch with their education experience in Australia.
And you also, before joining Australia, you joined Australia in 2021, I believe, and prior to that, you have a really long career building international education partnerships in the private and public sector. You've helped, build these relationships in countries like Sri Lanka, in Singapore, China, Vietnam, and now you're based in India. So how do you think those experiences would help you help Nepali students and Nepal?
I think an important part of the experience was that I gained all of that experience within the university sector, either in the private sector or the public sector, but working as an academic myself and teaching international students, and then working in partnership development and partnership management, establishing different modes of delivery for Australian qualifications. So in some of the countries that you mentioned, I was able to work with universities or other education providers in those countries to set up partnerships where Australian qualifications could be delivered in that country. Students could go through a program of study, get the same outcomes, the same great academic experience as they would in Australia without ever having to leave home. Some of those programs too allowed students to do both. to study part of their program in their home country and part of it in Australia, and then stay on and enjoy some period of work in Australia too. But there's lots of different models for us to be able to engage internationally, and it's that experience that I'm really keen to explore here in Nepal, to see how we can offer a broader range of opportunities and choices for Nepalese students who like an Australian qualification.
I think that is a perfect background set to my next question. It's also about a lot of Nepali students traveling to Australia for that degree, for that quality education. I think we come third after, China and India.
Okay.
But considering the size of the country and the population that we have, the numbers of students that actually go to Australia for higher education really a lot, drastically, exponentially a lot.
Yeah.
So what are the possibilities of those students, those Nepali students who are interested in getting that Australian degree, actually getting that in Nepal, or sort of like a twinning experience as well, some in Australia and some in Nepal?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I think there's an enormous opportunity. Just going to the popularity of Australia for Nepalese students, I think we shouldn't be surprised about that. Australia is a world leader in education experience. We have some of the best education institutions in the world, both for research and for teaching. And I think one of the things we don't hear about a lot is that there's a really strong Nepalese diaspora in Australia. That is, people of Nepalese heritage who've settled down in Australia, and they make a really welcome place for Nepalese students when they come to study an Australian degree. And so it builds out and enriches the experience for those students. But having said that, I think that the offer of an Australian qualification itself is really valuable. Australian qualification is very mobile. You have a qualification from Australia, it sets you up anywhere in the world. And so being able to explore opportunities to work with Nepalese institutions to offer Australian qualifications here is an important part of the work that I think that we can be doing in the Australian government.
Dr. Kennedy, like you just mentioned about the Nepali diaspora that is in Australia, I don't know if you know, but Tim Tams are now available in Nepal. And I think a lot of people who've tried and tasted Tim Tams are very, very happy, including me. But what I also wanted to, ask you is, or inform you about is Nepal exports very less compared to what it imports from Australia. So there's a huge trade deficit. But like you mentioned, there's also a huge Nepali diaspora. What do you think the possibility of exporting Nepali products to Australia can be like?
Yeah, I think there is an important opportunity. Nepali people, or people of Nepali heritage in Australia, are largely very successful group of people who are looking for some comforts from home. And I think I'm hearing about the beginning of some Nepali exporters, particularly in niche areas like in superfoods or in indigenous plant-based medicines or herbal treatments. These kinds of really niche products, I think, are a really good way to start, because they're things that Nepalese people can't get from the Australian community broadly. But also, I think there's a really strong opportunity in big things for Australia and Nepal to work together. For example, Nepal has great expertise and an abundance of green energy sources and production. And Australia too is developing technical ability to be able to work in these areas of green energy. I think there's an opportunity for us too to be looking at things like food safety and biodiversity to protect agricultural business, or to build agribusiness between our nations as well.
How do you think both the countries, Nepal and Australia, could also benefit in terms of trade and businesses? And how do you think we can create a business-friendly environment in Nepal to attract Australian investments?
Yeah. There's a really important part, I think, of the Australia-Nepali relationship that has to do with business literacy. It has to do with Australian business understanding what Nepal has to offer, and with Nepal understanding how Australia and Nepal can work together. And so for me, the biggest part of this, at least initially, is the people-to-people links, the connections that you see developing between Nepalese people and Australian people. And a lot of this coming through education. in Australia. These links build into important trade opportunities. The Australian government, particularly through Austrade, has an important role in finding those businesses that are looking to work together, those individuals and then the businesses, finding opportunities to match them, to support that business literacy that we've discussed. And that's part, again, of the work that we're doing here in this Australian delegation through our ambassador, Felicity Folk, who's here working very hard to establish and support the relationship between Australia and Nepal.
So Australia is also working a lot in terms of B2B and G2G also.
That's
in terms of
right.
facilitating and developing these prospects that
Yeah.
you're really excited about.
That's right. And it's quite nascent. I think that that's an important thing, that we have a long and enduring relationship. But the trade relationship is really quite new for us. We have focused a lot on aid in the past and will continue to. But I think the opportunity for trade is developing as Nepal is developing so strongly economically.
We also see that Australia is doing actively involved in developing many business relationships in India and China.
Uh-huh.
And Nepal being in between those two giant powerhouses, we're also looking forward and expect, some sort of acceleration in business development in Nepal as well, in terms of Nepal and Australia. So what can we expect in the future?
Well, Australia has been, just in recent months, been doing a lot of work with India in particular, through a number of trade agreements. And our Prime Ministers are very close. What this triggers is a lot of activity, a lot of travel into South Asia from our ministers and our senior public servants. So we expect that we're able to build off this travel, the presence of Australia in the region, to be able to make introductions to Nepal, to go back and in the same way I spoke about business literacy between business, and building that literacy for our senior government officials to understand better Nepal, to experience it for themselves. Because Nepal is one of those places it's hard to visit and not fall in love, right? So being able to bring Australian delegations to South Asia to introduce them to Nepal is really, I think, a big step forward for us and a great opportunity in the coming year.
We are so glad to hear that. And also the bilateral relationship between Nepal and Australia started from 1960s. It's been quite a long, long time.
Yeah.
And this relationship has grown gradually, but definitely accelerating in a really nice pace.
Yeah.
What do you think the Nepal government could do to better facilitate this relationship and, move this and accelerate this a bit faster?
Well, I think that you're right that it's an important, enduring relationship. I was looking at some statistics the other day that they're showing there are well over 1,000 Australia Award recipients in Nepal. And I've met many of them just in the last couple of days. You see the value that those young Nepalese people, and not so young now because our relationship has run for a long time, the contribution that they're making to Nepal and to the Australia-Nepal relationship. I think that Nepal and Australia are good friends. We continue to respect each other and to see opportunities for us to grow in trade. And in some ways, moving from aid to trade more substantially. And I think that this is happening organically. There is still a strong investment from Australia in Nepal, and we continue to make these investments. And I think that as we do grow together, we'll grow in breadth as well as depth. And the education offer, and the education experience of so many Nepalese people as they come back to Nepal and as they build relationships into Australia, I think that the relationship will grow organically.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kennedy, for giving us your time. And like you mentioned, I hope that this first visit will definitely not be a last, and we will see you traveling to Nepal quite often in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me here. If I could just make a couple of points that I would hate to miss. One of the important reasons that we have visited at this time is really to understand how better to engage in international education more deeply. You mentioned before that Australia has been very lucky to welcome so many Nepalese students in the past And we look to continue to do that. We want to make sure that the experience that our Nepalese students have is the best in the world. That they come, they study with us, they have an experience that's unparalleled, and they take that with them to set themselves up in the future. We think that this kind of experience is one that brings our countries closer together, and we look forward to being able to build on the reputation of Australia as that high quality education and experience provider that's unmatched around the world. So thank you very much for the chance to talk about it with you today.
Thank you very much.
Info Plus for genuine information.